Hi everybody, and welcome to our complimentary webinar, which is brought to you today in partnership with GRIST. The session today is entitled Customer Experience Insights from the GRIST Service Excellence Award. In the spirit of reconciliation, Auscontact acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes, and during that time, with the help of our very special guests today, Caitlin, Kate and Ben, we hope to spark your interest and engage you in the conversation. We love a good interactive session, so we're hoping to give you some ideas that you can take back to your respective businesses, but equally get you thinking and throwing some questions our way. To round off the session, we will have a Q&A where again, we'll have anything on the table while we've got these fantastic experts here on offer. So I'm Fran Southwood. I am the CEO of Auscontact and I will be your moderator for today. While we're waiting for everyone to join us, we might as well take the time to just quickly run through some housekeeping with you. Like I said, we want you to interact so we can maximise the benefits that you take away from the session. There's no need to take too many notes because we will actually send through the recording of the webinar once it's complete, and any of the slides from GRIST will make them available where appropriate. To interact with us, we'd love you to use the Q&A button on the control panel, and you can ask questions or you can make comments for Caitlin, Kate, Ben or myself from time to time. And again, if you put the questions down in the Q&A session, if they're pertinent to the topic we're covering at that point in time, I'll actually interject and throw them into the conversation, but sometimes they might be worth holding on to the end. So at least if you write them down, we won't lose sight of them and you won't forget them. If you're listening through headphones or speakers and you have any sort of trouble with your internet connection, note that you can actually click the raise the hand button and one of our Auscontact team will rush to your help. Alternatively, if you look at the confirmation email that you received with your registration, all of the relevant phone numbers and access codes will be there for you, so you can try it that way. So I know most of you would be familiar with asking questions. Again, you don't want to harp on the fact, but we love a good question. So whilst we're waiting, we might actually get trialing. Make sure you all are keyboard ready. So let's try out that Q&A button on the control panel now, just in case. And the question I'm going to throw you today, and for those who've been obviously registered because this is a really interesting topic, but we're lucky enough today to be joined by the winner of the 2022 Service Excellence Award. And they're here with us today. So which organisation took out the ultimate prize for service excellence at our Auscontact Awards Friday week ago in Melbourne? If you want to throw that up on our screen. What are we seeing? Anyone putting it up there? We've got 10, lots, NIB, of course, the wonderful NIB. And I know it was an incredibly close contest this year, which is fantastic to see. And what we are going to hear is some really interesting insights from the process itself, which might actually make you think about opportunities for you and your organisation to think about your core process and where there's opportunities for improvement. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. We are very lucky to be joined today by Caitlin Ziegler, who is the Director, Head of Innovation at GRIST. We've got Kate Golby, who's the Senior Behavioural Analyst at GRIST. And we've got Ben Stunnell, Group Service Care Manager at NIB. I will hand over to you, Caitlin, so we can really get underway and share all of the amazing insights that you guys always bring back to the table for us, but equally, particularly given Ben's here, share how well NIB did yet again in 2022. Thanks, Caitlin.
Thanks, Fran. We really are very thrilled to be here today and to present some of these insights, because we know that while the awards are fantastic, it's getting down to the guts of the insights, and what you can take out of some of these awards is really the value for everybody that's here today and has joined us on the webinar. So I just want to give you a little bit of context to set up for today. I'm going to give you some context on the award and how we assess. I'm then going to pass over to Kate, who's going to take us through some real detail about the insights and what we pulled out of our assessment this year. Then we're going to do a bit of a Q&A with Ben. We'll introduce him a little bit further on as well, and then answer any questions that you may have at the end as well. So that's about our agenda for today. But to give you a little bit of context about GRIST and where we come in, we've partnered with Auscontact. This is the second year we've run the Service Excellence Award. And really, one of the things that we do well is we develop, teach and assess micro-behavioural conversation frameworks. So a little bit like what you can see on the screen here. Now, most of you who are in contact centre land will be pretty familiar with behavioural frameworks, and you may even have something that looks a little bit similar like this in your contact centre. But this is the basis of where we start for looking at conversations and working out how we assess them. So you can see we've got phases there. We've got little intent statements about what that phase of the conversation is to do, what impact it has on the customer. But really at GRIST, what we do well is we go one level deeper than what you see here, and we get down to what the actual micro behaviours are that sit underneath those phases of the conversation. Now, our ability to really objectively measure these micro behaviours, we really look at a yes or a no when we're looking at micro behavioural measurement, means that we can get down to really those key moments that matter for your customer conversation. And we can really get down to whether they are there or not. It's a very binary, binary assessment. So we can really understand what a great conversation sounds like. Now, at GRIST, we've been doing this for a very long time. We've been working with customer-focused organisations for over 30 years in sales, service and leadership. And we really combine those principles of behavioural psychology to then really make these frameworks and really assess what micro-behaviours matter. So you can see in this slide here, I've been talking a lot about micro-behaviours, and it might sound like a bit of jargon. What are micro-behaviours? They really are what they sound like. They're teeny tiny behaviours, really small things that people can do, or they can say. And the key to them is that they are really observable and accessible, and that they're 100% in control of the person who's demonstrating them. So this is really important when you're thinking about a consultant who is on the phone. It's not reliant on a behaviour that they have to go to someone else to learn, or that they have to use a system to integrate into their conversation. It's about what they can do there and then in the moment to help your customer. So the key thing with the micro behaviours, the way we assess them and the way we design our behavioural frameworks, is that they are predictive of performance outcomes. Now, what I mean by predictive of outcomes is that the set of micro behaviours we assess, particularly around the service conversation that we're going to look at today, they are really designed to target the key moments that will ensure that your service conversations are customer-centric and predictive of successful customer outcomes. So when Kate goes through the data a little later on, you will see exactly the micro behaviours that we've assessed all the service calls against, and that will give you a little bit of context about what we're looking for and what those key moments are that we know contribute to those successful customer outcomes. Now, that's a little bit about the why and the how we assess. Here's a bit about the what. So what we've got here is just what we assessed. There were 7 industries that participated in the Service Excellence Award. Each organisation submitted up to 20 service customer interactions, and you could choose those interactions. So we really asked you to submit your best customer service interactions. They were then assessed by a whole team of GRIST behavioural analysts, who then benchmark that against, we look at about over 70 micro behaviours that we look at across our benchmark. Now, some of those matter more than others, and what you'll see today is about 20 of those, the 20 that have really contributed to the scores that we looked at on who won that award. And then we've compared these results not only for the people who submitted this year, but to NIB, who came in at number 1. So you can see a little bit of context about what they did differently, but also compared them to our average service data. So our average service data is our service assessments that we've done over the last 2 to 3 years, and it's around 1,600 assessments. So a really good swathe of data to give you an idea of what the average is across the industry for our service award. Now, if I want to give you just a little breakdown of our industries and what industries we looked at this year. Our industries we had 7 of them. We had private health insurance, we had utilities, we had experiences, we had collections, fuel, everyday banking and government. So quite a broad range of industries that submitted to the award this year, which is fantastic because really nice to see how that conversation compares across those industries. And this brings me to another point about the way that we benchmark these conversations. Now, you might expect that there's quite a lot of difference between how you service customers in government to maybe customers in utilities or banking. What we do with our framework is really get to those behaviours that are core, that are consistent, and really talk to customer centricity regardless of what industry you're working in. So when you look at our graphs and the way that we assess, there are no behaviours there that can't be demonstrated by any one of these industries when we get into that. But that's about enough from me and giving you the context. I would like to pass over to our Senior Behavioural Analyst, who is our resident expert, Kate Golby. Now, she has actually personally assessed a good portion of these calls, so she really knows what she's talking about here. And she's going to take you through the insights from this year's Service Excellence Award. Take it away, Kate.
Thank you, Caitlin. And yes, so I will, as we go along, I will be providing you with as many insights as I can from actually listening to these conversations. So insights, examples, and impacts on customers, I suppose, and how you can improve your service conversations. So to give you a bit of context to the results and the data, I'll be taking you through and trying to build some suspense, I suppose, as we go through, beginning broadly and working our way down to that top performing service contact centre. So at each of the stages, I'll be showing a comparison to GRIST average service data, which Caitlin just explained is an average data sourced from 1,600 GRIST service assessments across 2020-2022. We'll use this as a baseline average of a market performance. Against this, we'll look at how the overall cohort companies participating in 2022 Service Excellence Benchmarking performed. I'll refer to these as Australian Service Contact Centres. And then we'll get to the meaty stuff. So we'll be looking at companies who are demonstrating best practice, doing specific behaviours really well. And then we'll get down to our number 1, the best performing company participating in this benchmarking. What that made them stand out, what does customers. Here we what we refer to customer journey. So it's key behaviours that Caitlin talked through from our benchmark and entire customer experience. So experience that the customer has while communicating with the company. This presentation asks from the beginning of the to the compare experience customers to an Australian contact centre, those calling an average GRIST service centre, as our tops. We assess both inbound and outbound questions on an account benchmark, just a few behaviours that are different in the beginning of the conversation, just to capture the specifics of each type of call. Our top didn't submit outbound recording, that's why they're listed just at the 2 or 3.
Kate, I might just interrupt you there because the sound is dropping in and out. Can I just ask?
The call very.
I think we've got a few notes coming to say that the sound is cutting out quite a bit for other people. Kate, can I get you to keep driving the slides, and I might jump in with some of the notes there on this one, if that's okay? Yep. I think we've got nods. All right, I will jump in at this point, and Kate, hopefully you can still drive the slide deck for me, and we'll see how we go with that. And I do apologise for the sound cutting out a little bit there. Essentially, what we have up on screen here is the customer, what we call the customer journey. So these are the micro behaviours we spoke about earlier, the micro behaviours we assess, and they're loosely moving through those phases from sort of the beginning of the call through your kind of discovery phase and questioning right through to the end of the call. And as Kate was, you may or may not have heard her say there, where you've got the grey bars, you've got our average service data. The blue line is all of the contact centres that entered the award, and then the pink line is our number 1, our winner of what they did differently. Now, again, you may or may not have caught it, but what Kate was saying there is we did assess inbound and outbound calls as part of this award, and there's no difference in terms of how we assess. We assess these as equivalent calls, but what you will see is there's slightly different behaviours we assess between the two. NIB, who is the pink line, they didn't submit any outbound calls, which is why they have a little break in their line there for those couple of outbound behaviours, but it doesn't penalise your scoring at all when we're looking at outbound behaviours. So really, when we're looking at this, we can see that for the most part, the groups really follow kind of a bit of a similar rhythm. There's peaks and valleys in similar places, and that may or may not come as a surprise to you. There's definitely areas where we know that there are behaviours that are tougher than others. So when we get into that questioning section, the identify the why and expand on the why, these are often pretty tough behaviours to demonstrate, and it takes a really experienced consultant to dig down into those really key questioning behaviours that can get to the root of what the customer's inquiry is. So you can also see that there are some really standout areas where NIB did something quite different. There's some significant difference with what they were performing and how they were looking at these behaviours. So as we go through this, we're going to sort of dig into whether these are really the secret to their success and what they actually mean for the call overall. So you can also see that the Australian Service Contact Centre mirrors that GRIST average quite perfectly, but you can see the performance on most behaviours is slightly stronger. So you're seeing that blue line being, for the most part, above our average service data, which is exactly what we would like to see and what we would expect to see, given that we really asked you to submit the best calls there. So you're seeing some really good uplift there based on the average when you're doing that comparison. So we'll move on from that. Kate, hoping you are still there and you can move us through. Fantastic. So now we're going to dig a little bit into the service contact centres, just who submitted to this award as a whole, as a group and a cohort, and see what was it that they actually did quite differently that really made those calls stand out over our average calls. So I'll jump onto our next slide. What Kate has pulled out here is, you may have noticed that when you looked at our customer journey, one of the behaviours that the Australian Service Contact Centres, or the group that submitted, what they did significantly more frequently than our average service data was to really empathise and enthuse with customers. So this behaviour really involves responding in a genuine, personalised way to a customer's situation or need. It really creates rapport and it helps generate a really customer-centric tone. So we're really pleased to see that you could pick that everyone who submitted picked up on this, and they were picking calls that had this behaviour demonstrated quite strongly. It really shows that the agent understands what the customer is going through, and it conveys excitement when it's relevant, or that real interest, genuine interest into their situation. We can see, if you look at the little graph there, the Australian Contact Service Centres, all the ones that submitted, remained really steady in their frequency of empathising and enthusing when you compare this year's results to last year's. And they're doing it twice as often than our average, which is really fantastic. But let's have a look at some examples about how this might sound. So for an empathise, really simple demonstration of empathy, that can be a bit stressful, can't it? Really easy. If you want to see an example of how you can enthuse, congratulations, that sounds fantastic. Really, really easy behaviour to demonstrate. It's pretty simple, right? But knowing that, you can see why it's a bit surprising that even on the best service conversations, we're still only seeing this happen half of the time. So I want to really celebrate the strength here that we're seeing this really in that 50% is a good result to see that demonstrated, but it also shows that there's always room that you can really boost that empathy and enthusement behaviour. That it's a really easy one for your consultants to demonstrate. All right, we might jump on. Now we've got a bit of an insight into our best practice awards. So these are not awards that we did officially, but we did want to highlight a couple of companies that really stood out when we looked at the assessment and were some of our finalists for the Service Excellence Award, but demonstrated some behaviours a little bit differently to some of the others. So our first, I guess, little mini award for this is, I'll wait for Kate to put up the slide because I don't want to ruin the surprise. It is the most inquisitive service contact centre we judged as Recoveries Corp. Now, let's have a jump into what they actually did differently. And hopefully these slides stand up. We will see how we go. So Recoveries Corp, the inquisitive nature of their calls, what we really looked at, what we dived into was, as you can imagine, their questioning. What they displayed was a really strong dedication to understanding their customers. So often we see a really reactive and transactional consultants. They just jump, when you see them being too transactional, they jump straight to product or systems and processes and all of those sorts of questions before developing an understanding of what the real underlying reason for the customer's call is. Now, the ability to uncover these drivers, really, they don't only just help with the inquiry and understanding the customer better, but they really drive rapport and build connection by expanding that conversation to broader needs. And in turn, what they actually do is reduce call handling times, and they deliver a much better customer experience by demonstrating that genuine interest. So you can see here a little bit of the data. The Recovery Corp's consultants use the initial customer inquiry as a trigger to ask those questions that drill down to the underlying reason behind the call, far more often than even the other Australian service contact centres did. They really did this really well. So half of their calls, they're drilling down. They also seek to understand the customer's situation in over 90% of their interactions. Now, that might seem like a really obvious one. Of course, they're going to ask some current situation questions, lifestyle, that seems like an obvious thing to ask about. But interesting when you look at the data that it's actually not demonstrated that frequently when you look at our average service data. A little bit more when we look at the ones that submitted, but certainly not as high as what we saw with Recovery Corps. So you can see an example there on screen as well. What would this sound like? A little bit about the identifying the why. Could you tell me a bit about why you've fallen behind on those payments, Heidi? Followed by, are you getting any Centrelink benefit at this stage? So you're sort of digging down into some of the reasons, or that's sort of getting a deeper understanding of the inquiry so you can best meet that customer need and what their expectations are from the call. So well done, Recoveries Corp. We were very impressed with your questioning and the empathy and the way that you built that rapport through your questioning. Very nicely done. Now we have another little best practice award, and this is for value add. So our value add award goes to Momentum Energy, which will come up in a second. There we are, there it is. Now, Momentum Energy's conversations, the big takeaway from this is that we all know that anti-hawking is a big inhibitor for when we're talking about value add. And we also know that in service, value adding doesn't seem as important because it's not like you're really doing that cross-sell or that upsell. But even when you're working in the restrictions of anti-hawking, or you're working the restrictions of no advice, or working within service, doesn't mean that you can't value add for your customers. Really, value adding for a service conversation, it's not the upsell and cross-sell, but it's that education piece. So educating your customers about alternate or additional services, or little things that could enhance their interaction, or other places they can go for information. That further valuable information is a really key one. And this is something that we saw with Momentum Energy that they did exceptionally well. And you can see that the blue down the bottom is everybody. Our pink line there is NIB, and you can see that Momentum Energy actually really outperformed even NIB, sorry, Ben, on the value add there, with that initiating that value add, asking a little question, and then educating those clients. So you can see that's nearly up at 75%. That's a lot of calls that they're giving extra value for their client. By giving that sort of further information, you can imagine how this would play out for first call resolution, helping customers with that additional information that will help them not have to call back if you can help them there and then while you've got them as a captive audience. You can also see that they are, it's something that really helps to build that customer loyalty. So if you think about how this might sound for a service call, that are you comfortable accessing your account details online? I can organise access to your account through our member portal if you like. That way you can check the status without needing to give us a call next time. All of those sorts of things which really can add a lot of value to a customer and actually help with a lot of the metrics that I know that are really important for every contact centre across the board. That FCR, AHT, it really is helpful to look at that education piece when you've got that captive audience. So well done, Momentum. Really impressed to see how you did that value adding across the board or within the calls you submitted. It was a really nice touch. Now, I'll pause there for dramatic effect, because now it's time really for us to look at our number one, which we all know by now. Our winner for the Auscontact Service Excellence Award was NIB, and I know they are very loud and very proud from winning that award. Samantha, I did see all of your comments there. Very, very impressed with your enthusiasm. Now, NIB has taken out this award for the second time running, but really I know what we all want to know is what did they do differently and how did they manage to maintain that level of consistency from last year to this year? Because I think you'll find the results a little bit interesting about what they did this year as opposed to last year. Now, NIB's greeting was a real highlight of their customer interactions. So if we have a look at their data, and we can see right from the get-go that NIB consultants have an established safe place for the customer, and they really begin to build that trust and rapport early. What you can see in here, these 3 behaviours, that strong statement of assistance, which is, I can definitely help you with that. I can absolutely look into that for you, is a really strong one for them that they're demonstrating in 3/4 of the calls that they submitted. They also use this part of the conversation to help the customer feel relaxed and secure, not only by assuring them that they're here to help, but also by clearly stepping out how they're going to do it. So you can see the introduce process there is a really high one as well, and pretty low when you're looking at comparative data. And introduce process, a bit like your agenda statement if you want to look at it that way, but it's really just stepping the customer through a few brief steps about what you're going to do to help them get through to their inquiry. Now, the inhibitor to this behaviour sometimes is that consultants don't always feel like they know exactly what they're going to have to do up front, which is okay. That's not a problem. All the customer wants to know is a little bit of context. So even if you don't have all the answers up front, it's just giving them a few key steps, even if it's as simple as saying, I'll need to ask you a few questions before we can dig into this more. But once I've asked you some questions, we'll then go and have a look at what your options are further down the track. Those little key steps are really crucial to helping the customer feel safe and comfortable, knowing what to expect from the conversation and knowing that you're going to get to everything that they're inquiring about. So it's a really nice one to see. The last one there we've got is a little seek permission to proceed, which is really a simple, let's move on to the next step. You can see an example there. I can absolutely help you with that. There's your strong statement of assistance. I'll just need to ask you a few ID questions to get into your account, and then we can get into some of those abnormal transactions. Sound okay? So what you've got here as an example is all 3 of those behaviours wrapped up in one little short sentence. So you can see how easy it is to demonstrate these 3 things really early on in the call. And then the impact of that on the customer is just to really provide that comfort early on and expertise. You'd feel like you're in pretty safe hands if you heard that on the phone, I think. All right, jump into another standout area. Now, customer engagement was another big standout area exhibited by the NIB consultants. Engaging and connecting with the customer up front in the conversation, that really helps them feel welcome and connected. And by also assuring them you're here to help, you're reinforcing that I'm here to help you and I'm here as your expert. For us, the really big takeaway here is that the Australian Service Contact Centres, as in everyone who submitted, were only regularly using the customer name on about half of their conversations, which is really interesting because, again, this is a very simple behaviour to demonstrate. But you can see with NIB, it's almost 100% that they're looking at that they're using the customer's name for that engagement piece. And we all know how important a customer name is in building that rapport early on. Now, service calls on a whole, when we're looking at AHT, we're looking at relatively short calls. They can be anything from 3 to maybe on the upper end 10 minutes long, but on the whole, they're mostly pretty short. We're not asking for the customer's name to be used lots of times through the call. Really, it only has to be a couple of times. Once at the beginning, once at the end will be enough to really solidify that, that you've listened and you're responding to that customer personally. So the other thing you can see here is that they then double down on that rapport building. So the seek to engage and looking to engage with the customer on a bit more of a personal level is really high on the calls they submitted as well. Again, nearly 3/4 of them showed that seek to engage behaviour. So engagement can be as simple as asking someone about their day or the weather. But the key is that it's either proactively initiated by the consultant or as a genuine response to customer engagement. So it's picking up on something that they've said. Now, again, then an inhibitor to that seek to engage behaviour is sometimes, oh gosh, I've really got to get through this call quickly. I don't have time to engage too much. I don't want them to go off on a tangent. We're not really looking for that. You don't have to engage on make the conversation really long-winded and off on a really long tangent. It's just a small moment where you can either acknowledge something that's happening in their life outside of the call, or engage with them on that personal level with something that they've said that you can pick up on. So it's really something simple that we're looking for here. But these little behaviours sprinkled throughout the conversation really help to make the conversation feel human and unique as well. It makes you feel like you're talking to a real person. But here's some examples here. This is an example of using the customer's name. Do you prefer Dominic or Mr. West? Great, thanks, Dominic. How are you this morning? How are the preparations for the move going? You can see a little bit of the seek to engage questions in there as well. All right. I'm going to leave it there in terms of some of the highlight behaviours for NIB, and we are going to delve a little bit more into this data a little later on. But what we wanted to do now is just play you a little snippet of an NIB call. Now, this call, I should say, has been re-recorded and we've taken out, so it's you can't hear the customer or the consultant or what they sound like. It has been re-recorded and any identifiers have been taken out. But this recording just sort of highlights some of these really simple engagement behaviours that we've just seen on those last two slides and how they can be simply woven into the first 30 seconds of the call. So, Kate, hopefully you can play from your end.
I've been told I need to go to hospital for a few procedures and I'm just wanting to make sure I'm covered.
Yeah, of course. They're great. You've certainly come through the correct team. I can definitely assist you with that hospital cover check today. To go through this, I'll break it into 3 sections. We can start with the inclusions and go over how the benefits are paid to the hospital. Secondly, we can go over the medical specialists. And finally, we'll go over the claiming. So about 5 or 10 minutes. Do you have time to do that today?
Yeah, that's fine.
Great. Okay, I'll get everything loaded up for you. Won't be long. How's your day been so far, Ryan?
Not too bad at all.
Yeah, great. That's what you want just before the long weekend, isn't it?
Exactly.
So again, I just want to highlight really simple, short 30 seconds, and that ticked off pretty much half of our benchmark in terms of those engagement behaviours. So you can really see how simple it is and just how pleasant it is to also hear that from a consultant, the way that they move through those behaviours and built that rapport really early. You can kind of imagine that that call is going to go fairly smoothly, and the customer is going to feel pretty confident that that consultant's really going to help them do what they need to do. Okay, I do want to do one last little deep dive into NIB, and this is a little bit of a comparison of last year's results compared to this year's results. And we do have Ben Stunnell, our special guest from our winners, NIB, joining us, and he's going to join us in just a minute to give us a little bit more insight into this data and what's really going on behind the scenes that has driven both last year's award but also this year's, and the differences that we see. But I think it's quite an interesting comparison, because what you can see here is that with this little snippet of conversation, it is quite different to what they submitted last year. In fact, if any of you joined us last year for the webinar, we would have highlighted that one thing that they did last year in NIB really well was some of the questioning behaviours. And you can see actually last year they had almost 0 seek to engage behaviours. They didn't do that seek to engage behaviour at all. But they made up for that, because while they weren't doing some of the engaged behaviours, they were doing lots of the questioning behaviours really strongly. And you can see that identify why was quite high compared to the other data. And what you can see here is that there's actually lots of different ways that you can build rapport and lots of different ways you can engage with your customer. And because you had these NIB consultants who are really skilled at questioning and getting into the inquiry, they didn't actually need to build as much of that engagement, or didn't need to use those engaged specific behaviours up front because they were doing the questioning so well. And you can see it's actually turned around this year. The questioning has dropped off a little bit, but they've really pushed up the engaged behaviours, which means that they're kind of doing the same thing, but just doing it in different ways. And what I really like about this is because it demonstrates for, I hope, everyone who's on the call today, that when we are looking at assessing and looking at these micro behaviours that are the key moments, it's not actually about ticking every box. It's really about finding some strengths and doing them really well. So while we saw these differences, NIB have ended up with the same result in that they've got a really strong customer-centric conversation that has scored really well for us, because they have really focused on doing some of the things that they do well really consistently and excellently. So it's been reflected in their results. we're really keen to hear from Ben about what changed behind the scenes, which have drove some of this result. But really, what we've been talking about so far is the outputs and the impacts on customers. And we could talk about that all day. But what we really want to get is some insights into the inputs and how NIB drove this result. So I would really love to introduce our Group Service Care Manager at NIB, Ben Stunnell, at this point. And I'm going to give him a little bit of a bio. Ben's going to answer all these questions for us. But a little bit about him. Ben has been at NIB for 12 years, all of which have been around the contact centre operations. He initially joined the business as a frontline consultant in the sales and service space. So he really knows it from the frontline all the way through. He's a graduate of the NIB Future Leader Program, and he's taken on team leader roles across the contact centre space before leaping now into the management sphere. He spent 4 years predominantly offshore as NIB's Group Manager of Offshore Operations before then settling back in Australia and taking on his current role of Group Manager for Service Care, where he leads the inbound customer service teams of around 150 people, and they handle around 500,000 conversations every year. So Ben, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
And congratulations again for the results on NIB. It's just awesome to see that result from you.
Yeah, super proud of the team. Yeah, we certainly worked really hard, and we took away our results from last year. And you saw there was some areas where we scored quite lowly, and we focused to try and change that this year. So I'm really glad to see that we've had some significant uplifts in the areas that we've really spent time focusing on.
Well, thinking about that and thinking about the customer service culture that you have, I'd really like to hear about how you've built that real true commitment to customer satisfaction and service. Can you tell us a little bit about the culture at NIB, how you built that?
Yeah, well, our approach to service is certainly shifting. NIB used to be a payer of sick care, and we're much more focused now on becoming a health partner with our customers. And so what that means from a frontline perspective is to make sure that we're really focusing on how we can add value, how we can build trust, how we can make those moments that matter. Health insurance is a really competitive industry, and the products are all quite similar, and they're pretty expensive as well. And we know, one of the key differentiators for us is our member experience. And so getting to know our customers on that deep level, being proactive and finding ways to reduce effort and improve satisfaction is really what we're trying to do.
Oh, that's fantastic. It's really good to hear. And then thinking about how you build this culture, can you tell us a little bit about the training and the coaching that happens at NIB?
Yeah, for sure. Training around soft skills, which we call our LEAP framework, it starts through the onboarding journey, and it's really integrated the whole way through. So frontline training for us is 2 full weeks, and then followed by a week's worth of buddying with subject matter experts as well. But throughout that process, they're sort of spending time observing these experts as they're learning the modules to really see the behaviours in action and really understand what best practice looks like, so they can sort of build that competency through training. There's also 2 days of that 2-week program that's actually spent really just on the LEAP framework, those soft skills, and really mastering those. And that includes lots of role plays and things like that. But then, of course, we have our 1 week of buddying, which is with a subject matter expert. Firstly, observing, then sort of controlling the screen, and then eventually taking over and being deemed competent, ready to then fly solo after about 3 weeks. In terms of coaching, our leadership role is completely focused around developing our people. We've certainly shifted away from the traditional model of team manager, and we have our squad of performance leads now. And really what that meant was taking a good look at all of the tasks that we expected of our leadership team and trying to take away any of those that really wasn't adding value to developing the team and driving performance. And so I think that's been quite a big change for us, and we've invested quite heavily in the shrinkage with our people to make sure our leaders get the right amount of time with their people to be coaching, to have those team sessions and share best practice, and really focus on the behaviours that get the results. So I guess outside of that, all of our KPIs are really centered around our soft skills, our coaching metrics, making sure we're measuring the behaviours that make the difference.
I love to hear all of that, especially about measuring the behaviours and all the coaching that you're doing. I'm a huge fan of coaching to drive these sorts of results. But I want to dig into something I've touched on before. So we had a little look at those changes in NIB's results between 21 and 22. So from your side, what did change and what remained the same across that period?
I think quite a lot changed for us. In the last 12 months, we certainly weren't immune to the effects of COVID. And so we've seen some attrition, both internal and external, but also we've moved completely onshore. So, previously, half of our contact center for service was located offshore. And so that's meant, quite a lot of recruitment for us throughout this year. And so 65% of our service center is new, sort of within that first 6 months. And so when we saw the results earlier, obviously the engage section was where we certainly had our strengths. It sort of makes a lot more sense to me because we've probably lost some of that experience where those more advanced skills and really asking those discovery questions is maybe something that comes with a bit of time and practice. Whereas, for us with newbies on the floor, our focus is really sort of mastering each component of that call process at a time, and engagement is really where we've spent the most of our time.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, really. Newer workforce, and that you're focusing on those engagement, those behaviours up front. But interesting that that strong focus has really got you that consistent excellence across. Love it. Last question for you. What do you think makes NIB really stand above the rest?
Well, I think, this award's been around for a couple of years, but we've been doing this for a long time, and working with GRIST, I think it's been 7 or 8 years. I remember when GRIST initially came in to start working with NIB, and I was a consultant then, so it's really, all of our conversations, all of our focus is around our soft skills, our coaching methodology, and developing our people and keeping people engaged, of course, as well, focusing on the behaviors that drive the result. Our strategy as well is to, think more smartly around how we can have our aces in places, connect members to the best consultant to handle that type of inquiry. And so perfect example was maybe one of the samples that you played earlier, which is, identifying our consultants that are the best at handling that, hospital conversation. It's quite complex. They can be real moments of, of truth for our customers. And so, of course, we would want our best consultants to handle those conversations. And so thinking about how we can really change that service experience and understand what a customer wants and make sure that they certainly get it up front. So I think that's probably the big one. Outside of that, we really do focus on our leadership development. In the bio mentioned I was a graduate of our Future Leader program, but most of our leaders are. And what it means is that, I think it's 86% of our leadership team have come through the ranks at NIB starting on the phones. And so they sort of know it inside out. They know what it means to do it. They sort of have that best practice to then take into the leadership program. They attend coaching for results workshops, which is, of course, is run by GRIST, and we get benchmarks. And before they then step into a full-time performance lead role, they've sort of already got that expertise ready to, to share with those teams when they get to take on a, full-time position.
And I love that. I think it's relatively common for a lot of people off the front line, if they do really well, to step into those team leader roles, I think, across contact centres. But what we often see is that sort of lack of leadership development that gives them the skills, because it's very different skills to then lead a team versus be on the front line taking calls. So I'm always in huge admiration about NIB, about the enormous amount of work you do with emerging leaders in the background, and the mentoring. I know, Ben, you do a lot of mentoring of emerging leaders too.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was terrific to get those insights from the behind the scenes. Now, I just want to touch a little bit on what can you do with all this data from here? Like, how can you take this back to your teams? Because I'm very cognizant of, we've given you a lot of information today. It's a ton of insights. Ben has given you additional lots of information and insights. What can you do with it? And so what we've done is put together just a little brief template for you of a focus session that you could actually take back to your teams and run. And really the idea of doing this is that you can take this report. Everyone will get a copy of these slides at the end of this presentation. You can use that as a bit of a prompt for your team to have a look through those micro behaviours and understand where your strengths and your gaps might lie. But also you could probably take it in team by team if you're a team leader, and really look at getting your team involved and your team members involved in looking at their conversation, what's currently happening. So a little template here, we've got a few prompts for you to have a look at. We've got a little bit of preparation. Always important to prepare for a session first. And really, as you would all be doing, I am sure already, the key part of preparing for any team session is really looking and observing live calls. What is it that you're actually hearing, and what can you observe yourself about what your consultants are doing? And then assessing those sort of, can you hear the micro behaviours? What strengths and gaps can you see? And you'll have all of those tools because you have exactly what we've assessed in this pack to see what it is that we're looking for. Maybe it's something different that you're looking for, but you've got a good base there to start looking at those micro behaviours. You can put together a bit of an agenda and prepare your session, but getting into the guts of it, you really want your people to start thinking about that current state of what's actually happening for themselves. So getting your team members to listen to calls as well, or getting them to really think about what impact they have on the customer, to make that a little bit real and think about that current state. And this can be a really collaborative, interactive kind of thing. Kate, I hope we still have you there, but if you can move through, perfect. So we've got a couple of little prompts here of some questions you might want to whiteboard with your team. A couple of things that you could ask them about. What do they think is going well? What do you think you might be missing out of the calls? What do you think, in the crucial one, what is the impact for the customer if you miss this or if you do this particular behaviour? And this is a really great point for you can add in your own observations once you've got drawn out some thoughts from your team members. Now, desired state is just as important. So while we want to look at what we're currently doing, moving into what you would actually like to be, what you'd like those calls to sound like, or what you'd like the impact on the customer to be, is the really crucial point here, because that's getting into the guts of what you want to see as a change. So a couple of little prompts there about really thinking about stepping into your customer's shoes. What would make it better for them? What do you think they actually want out of this conversation? What would be the impact if this was changed, if you did something differently? And then really delving down into your team members, getting into that barrier or that root cause of maybe why change isn't happening. So what is it that they see as a barrier to then making that little shift, or you know, including the customer's name a little bit more often in their conversations? And it might surprise you that those barriers could be quite different for each individual in your team. And it will help you as a leader to think about how you can actually support your team members to enact some of those really crucial micro behaviours. Now, one big thing, and I love that Ben mentioned it before, when you're going to look at changing any behaviours, it's really crucial to practice them. You can't just give someone a behaviour and expect them to be able to do it straight away on a phone call with a customer. Really good to let them practice in a safe space and role play those behaviours. And I love that you mentioned role play, Ben, because we do know that role play is the most effective way that you can practice a new behaviour that you need to do. There's nothing more effective or a better tool that you have at your disposal to get your team members feeling comfortable with what they're doing differently. So role play is a great thing to do as a team activity. Have a bit of fun with it. Everyone finds it a little bit painful, but it can be a really effective and great interactive thing to do when it's done well. And then lastly, it's thinking about how you can build their commitment. So if we're thinking about setting goals, I think it's pretty common to see goals, and particularly in contact centres, that are set around AHT or NPS or other metrics. Crucially, if you really want to see change within your team, it's setting those goals around those inputs. So setting them around what behaviour am I actually going to change, and knowing that there's a link between that behaviour that I want to change and then the customer output that I'm expecting, or the outcome that I'd like to see at the other end of that. So getting your team to commit on what they're going to action, what they're going to do differently, is a really nice way of rounding out that little session, and getting them to really stick to just one thing, one tiny little thing that they can do differently, so it's really easy for them. And really easy then to see that change in practice, and for them to get that little win, which will make them feel more confident about doing more of those changes in the future. So sticking to one micro behaviour, or potentially you could go, right, as a team, we're going to focus on that engage section, but let's get each individual to pick their own engagement behaviour that they're going to enact, or they're going to action. That's a really nice way of looking at it as well. And you can see we've got a little bit of an example of what we would consider an input goal or a micro goal or a behavioural goal. Committing to saying something like, I'm going to use that strong statement of assistance, and I'm going to do it at least 15 times today in my shift. I'm going to record that and see that I can do it to really build up my strength in demonstrating that behaviour. Now, the crucial thing as leaders, we know you have to follow up. So it's following up and offering that support and checking in to see how that's going, and to see what sort of change you're seeing across your team, and following up not just on effort, but then seeing what those outputs are on the other end. What are you getting by making that little shift? Is it making a difference on your metrics that you know that matter at the end of the day? So there's a little focus session template that we have for you that you can use, or you can tweak, or you can do whatever you like with. A nice way of thinking about the data that you've seen today and breaking it down to something that might be a little bit more palatable for your team. We've also got on the next page a little micro goal template that you may or may not want to use, but this is something that can be used at a team level or an individual level, and it's a really nice way of just, again, breaking it down in a smart way. It's very similar to a SMART goal you might recognise there, but a great way of making sure that you're actually covering your bases when you're setting these sort of input goals, that you're getting a commitment to someone doing something differently, and that you're going to be able to follow up and see what they've done. One of the bits that I really like in there, because I am all about the data and all about the behavioural analytics stuff, I love the measure part. How are you going to record that you're actioning that behaviour and what results you get? So it's really easy for a consultant, as they're sitting there on the phone, to just jot down a little note to themselves about when they've demonstrated a behaviour, so you can check in with them to see whether they have done it or not. And equally, really, really important for them to see the impact and why it is that they are changing that, for them to start really trying to assess and notice the difference that behaviour makes. So what are they hearing from the customer there and then on the phone call that is different, that they may not have had before? What impact did that behaviour had? What sort of response did they get? Did it make them feel good? Was it something they feel like they need more practice on? So all those sorts of questions are really rich fodder for you as leaders to use as coaching, and how you can follow up on those behavioural changes, and also get your team really motivated about how they can do that customer conversation better. So I hope that's helpful, but that's a little bit of a follow-up on something you can take away that may or may not be useful. But I would like now to throw back to Fran, I think at this point, and just ask, Fran, do we have any questions? And I'll throw it over to you.
Thanks, Caitlin. That was fantastic. And I know we've seen lots of comments in the chat. A big call out to Ben saying, well done, what a great job you're doing there. And certainly that focus of coaching and actually, continuing to look for those opportunities to improve is fantastic, what we love to see. There's a really good question here, Caitlin, in relation to tailoring the service approach or the micro-messaging based on some of the challenges we've got with different cultural or language backgrounds of the customer. And any suggestions or comments you've got on that?
Oh, yes, I'd love to take this one. One of the things I actually love about a behavioural framework rather than a scripted framework, we know we've all worked with scripts in contact centres before. The difference with a behavioural framework is it means you do have flexibility to nuance some of those behaviours to really help either make your signature behaviours that you want for your organisation, or to kind of cater for some of those situations where there's you've got another barrier to get over. What I would suggest, particularly when you're looking at language barriers, and I'm assuming, Fran, that was from the customer point of view, there's sometimes language barriers on that side.
Yeah, customer.
Yep. You'll find that there's actually a lot of behaviours in that framework that can really help you address those. And one of the crucial ones I'd say is the introduce process right up front. Introducing the process and doing it slowly and carefully and really going through what it is that you're going to do will really help up front in that call to set up the expectations, but also to ask, that clarifying or paraphrasing those questions back to ensure that you're really understanding the inquiry, which is another behaviour we've got up in that framework, is a really nice way of making sure that you're all on the same page, because understand language barriers are difficult for both sides, both the consultant and the customer. It can be exceptionally frustrating. So that sort of checking in is a really crucial one. The other one I would also put in there is the check understanding. So check understanding is a really key behaviour that, again, funnily enough, it's such a simple one to do, and yet we actually see it done fairly infrequently when we look at service data, that check understanding. But if we're talking about customers that may have barriers already in front of them for understanding, that check understanding becomes really crucial. And while it's important to do that at the end of presenting a solution, when you're talking to customers that you may be worried that they're not getting the information up front, or they're not understanding your questions even, that check understanding could come in at multiple points through a call. So those would be some of my suggestions of what you could dig into there. I'd also say throw it out to your team, because your team will be able to come up with some ways that they could make it a bit easier as well, if they've got that first-hand experience with dealing with those customers.
I think it goes back to, even that exercise that you said, working with your team in a room, actually gives you the opportunity to focus on what's the problem we're trying to actually overcome here. Yeah. What is that barrier for the customer, particularly with that English as a second language, etc. Quite often the assurance part is absolutely fundamental to often why they're even calling. So, yep. Being able to pick up all of those additional micro behaviours can actually continue to add to that. Look, we haven't got any other open questions, so I'm going to put it out to the group to start thinking and start putting some up there. I think I wouldn't mind asking Ben a question. Ben, if you think about your journey from last year to this year, obviously you've had some other environmental impacts, new staff, etc., which I think every single one of our organisations is going through. But if you think about your approach, rather than trying to eat the whole elephant, you've clearly taken a really considered approach to what it is you wanted to focus on, recognizing the impact that that would have on customer, but equally the confidence it builds in your staff when they feel as though they're doing things well, they're picking it up quickly. So there's kind of multiple benefits to thinking small about some of these changes. If you could give some advice to some of the attendees today who want to really think about where they start, where's a good starting space? And is it going to be different for everybody, or is it just start? You know, what's your advice?
Great question. I mean, I think for us, it was always start from the start. You know, we like set the call up. You make sure the customer knows that they're in the right place, that you definitely can help them, and that they have a full understanding of what the conversation is going to require today. And if you can do that, I think it sort of sets up that whole conversation to flow really nicely from there. And you know, it like with the demonstration earlier, it doesn't have to be anything too complex. You know, an agenda statement can be, you know, just a couple of sentences. It's not going to blow out your AHT, but it's definitely, you know, it pays dividends in terms of the customer, you know, having that trust and that they're in the right place, and that you've already kind of got them on board to then take them on the journey through that conversation. So for me, yeah, I guess, you know, obviously it worked for us in this case, but certainly my recommendation would be to really focus on that engagement part and building that trust and connection with the customer early in the call.
Yeah. Caitlin, have you got any comments on where people would get started?
I think it's a fair call to start with the beginning is always the easiest way. I must say, a strong statement of assistance, I'm always impressed that you get that coached in so early in NIB, because that's one that new consultants always struggle with, that strong statement of assistance, because they feel like, oh, I don't know if I can say I absolutely can help because I'm not sure I can. So that's a bit of a barrier to jump over that one. The only other thing I would say is don't stay too long and engage when you can see that there's other problems that you have. So it will be a bit individual, and it will be about sitting with your team and going, like you said, Fran, what problem are we trying to solve here? So what is actually the thing that's going to have the most impact for my customer? I think for NIB, definitely that engage, setting up the call early has really worked for them. It may actually be different for you though. You might want to have a look at jumping into a different set of behaviours or a different one that you want to focus on. I know earlier this year we also ran our top 10 which is very similar, but for the sales contact centres. And Noble Oak, who won that award, they took a slightly different tack to what Ben's talking about, and they just went, well, what are going to be our signature behaviours? So they just picked 4 out of that, out of what they wanted to do in a call, and went, we're just going to go hard on these 4 or 5 behaviours, and that really worked for them because it gave them quite a signature experience for the customer, and it meant they also did really well because they had that consistent excellence across the call. And what we find when we're assessing calls is that when you do keep the focus narrow, and I really like how Ben's talked about keeping that focus narrow, and you too, Fran, about keeping it small and narrow. When you can do things really excellently and consistently, it actually has a follow-on effect, that you get other behaviours being lifted because you're feeling good about what it is that you're demonstrating and feeling good about the wins that you're getting on the calls. So that would just be my counter to that.
Thank you. And I think you're right. It's definitely, there's a real power in confidence, isn't there?
Yeah.
And you actually see that continue to allow, you know, your staff to actually feel really empowered. Confidence breeds that. Ben, what's next? What's next for NIB? You know, you've 2 years and running. I'm hoping there's a few people on the line that are, you know, pushing this charge to knock NIB off as the winners of service excellence. But if we can get some insights into what it is you're planning on focusing for the next 12 months, not that we're, you know, trying to steal that crown or anything, but it would be great for us to understand, again, given you've really successfully connected it to your staff journey, which, you know, I think hands down is a really strong approach. But what's next for you guys?
We certainly want to go for the 3-peat, friend. But look, I think to do that, you know, and I'm sure many across the industry are feeling this, you know, it's really important to focus on your people engagement. And that's certainly the space that we're, you know, really focused on. We know that sort of to gain that performance and to really develop those skills across the, you know, the service journey, we need to keep people, and we want them to stick around and develop with us. And so it's about understanding what are the barriers that sort of stop our consultants from being able to do a good job, and then how do we overcome that, and making sure we're closing that loop. So, you know, you're asking for these things, here's what we did. And I think we've started that journey really well. So, you know, we had an engagement survey complete last week, which was 82%, which is quite good. The previous one was 86. But again, in context, we've got quite a new workforce. So, I think either way, great results, but it's sort of not resting back and going, okay, cool, we've knocked that one off. I think even though our service experience is quite good, I don't think our agent experience is perfect. The tools and systems that they have could definitely be much simpler and easier to use. And that's kind of where we're heading at the moment is, how do we empower consultants to have better conversations and take away some of the distractions that, maybe the system's too slow, maybe they can't find the information that they need. Or how do we be proactive by serving them information about that specific customer that can help them have a conversation that's really powerful? So that's where we're heading. But in terms of micro behaviours, it's sort of taking a real deep look at our results and seeing where we can sort of lift, but maintaining that engaged piece as well.
No, that's awesome. Thank you, Ben. I'm mindful of time. Caitlin, Kate, Ben, thank you so much for your time today. I'm pretty sure I can confidently speak on behalf of participants. It was incredibly good session and really insightful. We'll send out the recording. We might send out some information. Caitlin, particularly the template that you had there looked really useful. And people can reach out if they want to have more information. Ben, I saw your offer as well, so thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Fran. Thank you, Jess and Auscontact. It was lovely to be part of this today.